And I'll hand over to Doreen to introduce the meeting. Doreen.
And welcome everybody. Today our speaker is Tony Allen. He's married to Jean. He has 2 children and 2 grandchildren. He has lived in Edinburgh for 50 years. They are both now retired and have been members of the Society for nearly 20 years. When he joined the Society, he probably had about 50 people on his tree. He now has close to 2,000 with his Anglo-Jewish side going back to 1760. Jean was a teacher at Rosh Pinna School for 30 years, and he ran his own promotions company. He was chair of his synagogue and on council for 15 years and is still involved. Being retired gave him the time to help with the genealogy on a new book about his subject, Dorothy Levitt. Now his subject, we called it Fast Lady, Miss Dorothy Levitt, Edward Aviator and Lady Motorist. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Tony for his talk this afternoon.
Thank you, Doreen. Right, let's start sharing the. Got to go into that. I hope you can see the image. Great, okay. Okay, so this is Dorothy. The point is often made that if you dig deep enough, 8 times out of 10, you'll find someone of interest in your family. You only have to watch Who Do You Think You Are or ITV's DNA to see this unravel with some surprising results. My story starts 10 years ago, at which time, with the help of JGSGB and my heritage, I had about 800 to 900 family members on the tree. In January, I received a phone call from an author, Anne Kramer, who was writing a piece about a female racing driver in the very early days of motor racing. She had found my details via the Society's family finder records. The name she gave me was Dorothy Levitt, a name that didn't register. Having looked at my tree list, I called her back and said, "I'm sorry, but she doesn't appear to be a relative." She then said, how about the name she was born with, Elizabeth Levy? And there she was, born 1882, the niece of my great-grandfather. As soon as I put the phone down, I looked on Wikipedia and wowed at the pages of information. This all confirmed Anne's story that she was an amazing pioneer racing driver. From that moment on, I have been almost obsessed with researching her life, especially using my detective skills, trying to fill in the missing gaps in her short life story. It seems everyone was trying to find out what happened to her between the years 1910, at her last newspaper report, and 1922 when she died. That was 12 lost years. My search started with my 3 times great-grandparents, Ralph, Raphael and Leah Hart, marrying in 1806 in Portsmouth, then moving to London around 1820. They had 9 children, 2 of whom were Philip and Joseph. So if you have a look at this map, you'll see Philip's Tavern, marked PH, near the top of the screen, and then Joseph's just a bit further down, right in the middle of St. James's Place. And you'll notice Great Synagogue on the right-hand side there. Both of them apparently, well, I think Philip produced wine or had labels made, whether he produced the wine or not, I don't know, but he had labels made saying Philip Raphael's kosher wines. And they were also sold to the Great Synagogue, I assume, for their services. Anyway, My great-great-grandfather ran this tavern in Duke's Place for some time, whereas his brother Joseph ran the Howard Hotel. Now, this is my, how I found this, I don't know, but I came across it, and it's an amazing photograph. This is my great-great-grandfather's pub at the bottom there, just on the corner of Duke's Place and St James's Place and Duke's Place. On the other side, Joseph ran the Howard Hotel. Again, how I found this, I don't know, but I was looking for anything that gave an image. And this was found at the London Metropolitan Archives. It was under the clothes warehouse or something, which is actually in the far distant on the right-hand side. But if you look to the left, right behind the barrel that's sitting in the road, is Howard's Hotel. At that time, it was called Howard's Club, but he changed it a few times. But anyway, that was his place. Joseph married Elizabeth Shewell around 1834. They also had 9 children. Their 8th child being Julia, who in 1877 married Jacob Levy. That's the Jewish Chronicle's announcement of their marriage. First living in Notting Hill Gate, then moving to a 3-storey house in 13 Culverston Crescent, Dalston. So that's the census showing where they were living at that time. Sharing with Julia's sister and her husband. This is 13 Culverston Crescent, as it was then. This is how it is now. It's still in existence. And there's a little plaque there. That's not a genuine blue plaque. Another writer decided to put a plaque up there and then take a photograph, hoping that English Heritage would agree to actually put a plaque up, but they never did. This address actually rang a bell, as my great-grandfather had died at the same address 6 years later. This certainly was a close family. Their first surviving child was Elizabeth, born in 1882. All this was fine. Then came the first challenge. Looking at the 1901 census, Jacob Levy could not be found. So I searched for Esther Levy, Jacob's sister. And there she was in Leconfield Road, Highbury. They'd obviously moved up to Highbury, with John and Julia Levitt and their children, Elizabeth and Elsie. So I was certain that this was the family, but for some reason they changed their name. Not very helpful for genealogists, especially when he already had a brother, John, that had died in 1904. It must have been around this time that Elizabeth decided to also change her name to Dorothy Elizabeth Levitt, this time with 2 T's, getting a secretarial job with Napier Cars run by Mr. Selwyn Edge, an early car manufacturer. This was the first unexpected endeavour Dorothy made, as Napier's showroom was in New Burlington Street, Piccadilly. What made her decide to work there, we can only guess. Her sister Elsie and all her family cousins, female cousins, had married by the age of 26. Dorothy was just 20 years old. Anyhow, by 1903, whilst at Napier's, she studied car mechanics, something that would later give her a huge advantage, and learned to drive. Probably because not only was she pretty, but as a female, it would attract greater publicity. Edge put her forward as one of his racing drivers and entered her into competitions. First newspaper report was not an actual race, but a court appearance for speeding at 22 miles an hour. That's 2 miles per hour over the limit at that time. How they knew that her speed, I can only guess. At this point, I'd like you to think about the environment drivers faced. In the early 1900s, most travel was still by horse carriage. In 1895, it's estimated there were about 14 to 15 cars on the road. By 1900, this had increased to 700 to 800 motor vehicles in the UK. Roads were very rough. Tarmacking had only started in 1902, and this was on very few roads. So in May 1903, Dorothy began her racing career. Her first report as a driver was in the long-distance trial run from Glasgow to London, taking 2 days to reach Piccadilly and arriving in 15th place. A feat is hard to imagine. Just take a look at this car. Would you attempt to drive this car for even a few hours, let alone 2 days on the trot? If this wasn't daring enough, her next news exploits came on the seas, as she is reported to have won the inaugural International Harmsworth Trophy in County Cork, Ireland, using a motorboat from Napier at a speed of 19.3 miles per hour. Within a month, she was racing her motorboat at Cowes, this time in front of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. After the race, the King and Queen asked her to perform various manoeuvres in front of the royal yacht, testing her skills. Whether she went on board or not, we don't know. I have actually contacted the Royal Archivist, and they've had a good look, but unfortunately they can't find any further details about this encounter. In August of that year, she is reported to have won the Gaston Menier Cup in Trouville, Normandy, again using a Napier boat. Back on land, in October, she won the Southport Speed Trials. This made her the first woman to compete in a competitive motor race in the UK. 1903 became the beginning of her meteoric rise, and it wasn't long before the newspapers referred to her as the Fast Lady, a name she certainly lived up to. Earlier, I mentioned the first of her court appearances for speeding. This fine wasn't the only incident that was reported. In November, she was the plaintiff in a case relating to an accident in April that year, when a horse-drawn mail van travelling down Tysoe Street near Farringdon went into her car, which was going along Rosebery Avenue. The car overturned, putting Dorothy in bed for a week. The court exchanges, as you can see on this newspaper, but I'll read them out. The court exchanges are worth reading as it's difficult to see. Counsel for the defendant. Since the accident, you have taken part in reliability trials. Dorothy, yes. You went to Scotland and back. Dorothy, I didn't race. You did 40 miles an hour. Dorothy, we were only allowed to go 12 miles per hour. You described it as a funeral performance. So it was. His lordship then said, I never knew they used motor cars for funerals. Dorothy, but the car I was driving at the time of the accident was not a racer, it was a little runabout town. His lordship, so it was only a little hearse. Defendant's counsel, coming from Glasgow, you had some people in the car. Dorothy, yes. Also, I think you passed some policemen disguised as tramps. Yes, they were sitting on a gate and suddenly jumped into the road, waving in their arms as if they were doing a war dance. The defence then contended the car was travelling at an excessive speed, implying it was normal for her to travel fast whilst the mail van was going slow. After a brief recess, judgment was given in favour of Dorothy. The other driver was fined £35, not an insignificant amount in 1903, but the authorities were trying to clamp down on accidents at such an early stage of motor car ownership. Maybe 1903 was too much for her, as at the beginning of 1904, she was reported to have taken some time off convalescing in Madeira. Again, this report shows even a break was noteworthy. 6 months later, a small item in the referee noted her recovery and that she would be back behind the wheel in the forthcoming Hereford light car trials. There is one item missing in these photographs: her dog. Fairly early on, saw the introduction of a special passenger, a Pomeranian dog called Dodo, given to her as a present. This unusual passenger gave a light-hearted incident reported in the autocar. Hereford trials, a curious behaviour developed among the male drivers. When they arrived, they had little toy dogs tied to their vehicles. It transpired they were gently baiting Miss Dorothy Levitt, the only lady driver who, it is well known in motoring circles, carries about with her a black Pomeranian dog companion, which is perhaps the most motored canine in the country. Dorothy countered this gesture by having a large box of dog biscuits distributed during their halftime smoking concert. They in turn invited Miss Levitt to attend the concert to receive their thanks and a standing ovation for being a real sport. Her dog Dodo was actually a present from Mademoiselle Cornell in France, which, because of restrictions, she had to drug to get it back into her toolbox. One thing I did find abide was news syndication. If you search for the name Dorothy Levitt in newspaper archives, it comes up with over 4,000 editions. However, you suddenly realise this is due to syndication, and this quantity drops down to about 700, which is still a great deal to read through. One other problem was her becoming a great self-publicist. Today, it is common for articles to be written trying to impress the reader with small, shall we say, inaccuracy. Dorothy wrote a number of pieces in which she stated, "At the age of 20, I ran away from home and went to Paris to learn driving. Her parents wanted her to marry someone she disliked, so she ran away. The family moved to the West Country where she rode horses, taking part in hunting and shooting. Her favourite pastime was fishing. Her father was in government service and retired to the country." None of these facts can be substantiated, especially her family, as they had moved to Brondesbury and John was listed as a commercial traveller. There are no records of her living anywhere further away than Baker Street. Her parents did move to Brighton, but after 1911. Anyway, by September 1904, she was back racing and winning. She took part in the 6-day Hereford light car trials and won 2 medals, even after breaking down and repairing the carburettor herself. October saw her take part in the Southport speed trials over a 3-day period. The Southport speed trials continue even today, and in 2021, the circuit followed the one Dorothy drove in 1903 in homage to the pioneering Dorothy Levitt, known as the fastest girl on earth. The Blackpool speed trials came next, where she was second. Again, something to bear in mind. In most cases, as you can see on this photograph, and that's only just a small part of the people that took part, in most cases, she was the only woman driver in these events, a point nearly always made in the newspapers. Maybe the rest at the beginning of 1904 helped recharge Dorothy's batteries, as 1905 became the best and probably busiest year. It started in March with her achieving the longest drive by a woman, a total of 410 miles from London to Liverpool, return spread over 2 days. First run, London to Liverpool, took 11 hours 55 minutes, with a return taking 11 hours 15 minutes, even with a broken water pipe, which she repaired. And as I said at the beginning of this, she took lessons in how to mend cars. And it was only because of this learning about cars themselves was she able to repair. A lot of drivers had to take a passenger being their mechanic. She never had to do this. Again, remember this is 1904, with no motorways, no petrol stations, no welcome breaks, rough roads, and all alone. In 2009, the BBC showed a documentary with Penelope Keith about this epic journey, including the fact that Dorothy introduced the mirror to see who was behind as a safety measure. The idea appeared in her handbook published in 1909 called The Woman and the Car, a chatty little handbook for all women who want to motor. For motor historians, this book is invaluable. In it, she starts by giving notes from her diary of events from 1903 to 1908. And again, even the notes from her diary, which she wrote in 1909, she made a few mistakes, but these were only dates that she made. She obviously didn't remember the exact dates when she was racing certain events. Anyway, various chapters then followed on maintenance, dress, how to drive, costs, faults, and how to mend them. Mechanics, hints, and motor manners was in another section. In chapter 2, under dress, she lists items she always carries in a compartment under her seat. Other than the hairpins and gloves, etc., she advises taking a large mirror with a hand grip. Before starting out, take the mirror and use it to see if anyone is behind before moving. Then place it into a little flap pocket on the car so it can be used during the journey. This must have been very difficult because steering these cars required both hands to be near or on the wheel at all times. I've actually tried turning one of these cars and very, very hard. There's no nothing to help you turn the wheels at all. Just a note, in 1909, the price of petrol was between 1 shilling and 1 and 4p a gallon. That equates to 13 to 18 pounds in today's money. Certainly not a pursuit for the average person. Another item she suggests taking is a small revolver, just in case it is needed. But then I suppose if she's driving alone, it's no wonder that she took a revolver with her. She would often write small bits of advice. This one says, the real way to enjoy a summer holiday is undoubtedly on a motor car. If you're travelling abroad, choose one without speed traps. In May 1905, 44 entrants started a 593-mile trial in Scotland over the summer of the roughest terrain any of them had ever driven. The drivers consisted of 42 men and 2 women. By the end, Dorothy was the sole woman and won a certificate. These trials were really used to show the reliability of the cars and prove that they are perfect for everyday use. As they were not using any racing vehicles, no medals or cups were given. It was at this time that another European race entered her portfolio. In June, she went over to Germany and took part in the Prince Heinrich Trophy. Germany became a place she would return to a number of times. With all this happening, 1905 was the year Dorothy made her first real attempt at the world speed record. At the Brighton Speed Trials in July, she achieved an aggregate speed of 79.75 miles per hour with 3 runs over a flying kilometre, becoming the women's world speed record holder. This event also showed how extremely dangerous motor racing was. At this meeting, a serious accident occurred. During these trials, a car driven by Arthur Brown swerved to avoid a pedestrian, ran up a bank, crashing into a telegraph pole. The mechanic, who was a passenger in the car, died with Mr. Brown seriously injured. As I said, most drivers had a mechanic sitting next to them. Dorothy didn't need that. And this is the actual car she drove with her world speed record. In June 1906, Dorothy herself nearly crashed. It was during the Selsley hill climb. The ground was wet from the overnight rain, and driving without anti-skid tyres, she slid and nearly went over the bank. However, she still managed to come 6th, breaking the ladies' record. She made 4 other appearances that year, one at South Harting, Hampshire, coming 2nd, where it was reported the winner had made adjustments to his car so that a mere woman didn't win. Then Aston Clinton in Hereford coming 3rd, and at Saltburn Pier, where her car actually broke down. The last and probably her best race was at the Blackpool Speed Trials. This time it was against the clock. Dorothy broke her own world record with an average speed of 90.88 miles an hour, which was truly remarkable, as just before the end of the race, her bonnet came loose, flying backwards and nearly taking her head off. Imagine doing 90 miles an hour in that car. I mean, even the wheels don't look safe, but I certainly wouldn't attempt 50 miles an hour in that. The strange thing is, I once owned a TR2 sports car myself, and while driving around Regent's Park, my bonnet lifted up and flew over my head. Luckily, nobody was behind. Following these races, the end of the year brought her a full-page editorial. In the penny illustrated paper, calling her the fastest girl on earth and the champion lady motorist of the world. In this article, she also issued a challenge. It read, "I am willing to race either here or at Ormond Beach, Florida, or elsewhere in the United States. The conditions need to be of the simplest. There is no one left in Europe with whom to compete. I have beaten them all, and badly too." A bold statement, but unfortunately, this never happened, as I can find no record of her visiting the USA, even though her achievements were well known in the States due to well over 100 reports found in the American papers. 1907 became another year of racing, but it seemed that by now lady drivers were accepted a bit more. However, this article appeared in the Gentlewoman in March under the title "Boycotting Lady Cabbies." This was not here, but in Paris. Cabbies had decided to boycott lady drivers as an unwarrantable liberty. Believe it or not, there were just 3 lady cabbies in the whole of Paris, And it's just 3 of them that they were worried about, so I can't understand that. From this, the paper then commissioned Dorothy to drive a cab around London, returning with a glowing report and the acceptance of passengers and hotels to female drivers. Her first race that year was in March. Dorothy ran at River Hill, Sevenoaks, in a 120-mile timed race with a hill climb to end the event. This is Dorothy at Brooklands. As you can see in the background, they're still actually preparing the roadway. So it hadn't even opened when she was there, but it was just a visit, as you'll see when I carry on. Even though earlier I was saying lady drivers were being accepted by the public, some of the racing world still held back. Most people have heard of Brooklands Circuit, which opened in 1907, closing in 1939, but most people are unaware it is that they disallowed lady drivers when it opened, and only relented gradually from 1908 with full participation in 1932. I've not found any other driving circuit that banned lady drivers at that time. Now, the intervening years allowed women to race in ladies' race only. This meant that Dorothy never actually had the privilege of racing here. That again is at Brooklands, so she must have tried the track but never raced against anybody else. A news report did say Dorothy was scheduled to race at the first Brooklands meeting, but in the end was only present with guests Lord Montague, the Duke of Westminster, Lord Lonsdale and Lionel Rothschild. Although my talk is about Dorothy, I have come across many other early female drivers who were also Jewish. For instance, in her next race in Bexhill-on-Sea, she came second with a Mrs. A.E. Cohen coming first. Other early drivers were Gertrude Eisenman, Lily Sternberg, and a few others that need further research. Back to Dorothy, and back to Germany, as in June, she again took part in the Prince Heinrich Trophy at Herkomer, winning a gold medal. Of the 190 entrants, 3 were women, with Gertrude and Lily being the other 2. This was no easy competition, as it was over a 6-day period, each day being over 200 kilometers long, with another hill climb ending the event. It was reported that at the prize giving evening, Dorothy wore an elegant Edwardian ball gown. Unfortunately, been trying desperately to see if I could get any photographs, but there is none available. We've gone through the German newspapers as well, but still no photographs could be found. October came, another win in her class, this time back in France at the Gaillon Hill climb, not far from Rouen. 1907 was another speeding fine was reported when Dorothy was caught driving a car causing a public danger to people in Cambridgeshire. It makes me wonder how the police were able to establish the speed of cars at this time. Without speed cameras, it appears they used a fixed distance and a stopwatch. Then again, with so few cars on the road, they'd have to be ready and waiting for long periods. Returning to Germany, she took part in the Prince Heinrich Trophy again, winning a plaque which still exists. It's owned by a gentleman in Germany. However much we've tried begging and offering money, he won't let it go. So, but it's the only memorabilia of hers in existence that we know of. Then in July, she was back in the UK, having entered the Aston Clinton Hill climb. This was to be the final time Dorothy would race in the UK. In August, she travelled back to France taking part in her last ever recorded event, this time in Trouville, the La Côte de Calvière hill climb. It was an unusual race to us as it required all drivers to carry passengers. It was nice to see this being her last race that she won against all comers. I don't suppose any race in these days would be allowed to carry any passengers. Maybe it was because her motoring backer, Selwyn Edge, decided to pull out using his Napier cars, but it was the end of a bright racing career. In 1908, Dorothy was still only 26 years old. So what to do now? As everybody knows, 1903 saw the American Wright brothers fly the first sustained flight. In the UK, the first flight wasn't until 1907, but by 1908, a number of manufacturers had taken up the challenge, and Dorothy turned her attention to this new invention. In November, it was reported she had written to Wilbur Wright asking him to accept her as a pupil so she could enter the race to compete in France and become the first woman to fly a kilometre. We don't know if she ever had a reply, but we do know she took a keen interest, and it was reported she attended numerous aviation events. This was in the Standard in 1909. In the interview, she says she is going to France to watch some aviators and inquire about taking lessons. And again, in November 1909, in the Northern Telegraph, it's reported Miss Dorothy Levitt, the champion lady motorist, whose wonderful speed record has never been broken, is determined to swell the distinguished ranks of aviators. She says, I fully recognize that it is to be the most popular sport of the near future. And soon as I'm able, I'm going to France to take up lessons seriously. If I were so fortunate as to have £1,000 to spare, I should buy an aeroplane today. Sorry, tomorrow. When I learn, I shall do so in a quiet and remote spot, and I shall not attempt to fly in public until I am satisfied that I'm thoroughly proficient. Following up on her statement, she went to Hubert Latham's School of Aviation in France and took lessons with Henry Farman. It was reported she had bought a Farman biplane and became a member of the Aero Club of Great Britain. At the beginning of 1910, more reports were published of her intentions to be the first pilot, but it was Hilda Hewitt in 1911 who achieved this milestone. It does appear the novelty had worn off, as Dorothy never received a license, and after 1910, very little is mentioned of her aeronautical experiences. We've dug as deep as we can, looking into all the records at the Aero Club of Great Britain, and there's definitely no license that was ever issued to her that we could find. Now, in addition to flying, motoring and motorboats, Dorothy also appeared in the news in 1909, having come fourth in the Garden Bennett shooting competition. So not only did she take a gun with her in the car at some of the exploits, but she was actually a good shot. It was at this time, 1909, Dorothy started writing, publishing her book, The Woman and the Car, a chatty little notebook for all women who motor or want to motor. Previous to this, she had written various pieces for the newspapers, but this book established her longevity and is still available today, albeit in scanned copies. As I've already said, the book itself is fascinating. It begins with a foreword by C. Bing Hall containing various notes from her diary for the years 1903 to 1908. A brief description of her life, starting with a statement that although Dorothy's private life would have a vivid interest for the public, he, Bing Hall, is forbidden to tread too deeply. And it's not surprising, because if he did tread deep enough, he would find that some of her statements were false. So begins the period most writers have had problems with. From 1910 to 1922, very little is recorded. We know she lived at Portman Mansions, Baker Street, but she never filled in the 1911 census. Whether she was following the suffragettes from abstaining, we've never found out. There is no records of her ever becoming a suffragette. Her parents were by now living in Bronsbury Villas at a boarding house. Why a boarding house? I have no idea, but it could have been a temporary place until they moved to Brighton, where they moved to when they were there by the 1920s. In 1910, Jacob's brother Benjamin, Jacob being Dorothy's father, Jacob's brother Benjamin had died, leaving an annuity of £200, the equivalent of £26,000 today, and a lump sum of £200 to Jacob and £100 to Julia, plus £600, that's £83,000, to be split between Dorothy and her sister Elsie. This, together with Elsie, Dorothy's sister, marrying in London to Mark Clarence Lewis from Brighton in 1917, could have prompted them to move to Brighton shortly afterwards. By the way, the legacy that Benjamin Levy left of £25,000 to the United Synagogue charities was still being used many years later. It equated to nearly £3.5 million in today's money. Benjamin actually never married, so I suppose maybe that's why he had so much money. One very difficult period of research is the First World War years of 1914 to 18. It seems impossible that Dorothy didn't get involved in war work, having many of the important skills required. Looking in the archives, 4 possible people crop up. However, I assume she used her new name and spelling, so only one seems a possible match. Many records were lost during the Second World War from bombing, so any hope of finding collaborative documents is slim. I mean, all these documents give us just a name and the department or the special military probation, but they don't have any addresses or any other information on them. What I do know is that from 1918 to 19, Dorothy lived at 50 Upper Baker Street until she died in 1922. So this is a photograph taken, it was around about 1925-30. In fact, I'm just about to see the date. Looks like 1904. So she would have been living there soon afterwards. Researching the Westminster records, that address was leased by the Women's Land Service Corps from the Portman estate. This gives some credence to Dorothy being a member of the Land Army. Another link appears in the Landswoman of 1919, reporting a good service ribbon awarded to D. Levitt by the Kent Women's Land Army. No other information is given. This requires further research at the Land Army archives. The British Jury Book of Honour also has a possible match, as it gives a Miss D. E. Levy in the Voluntary Aid Detachment, or VAD. This does seem very possibly our Dorothy. A few news reports do definitely refer to our Dorothy. The first on the 29th of September 1920 issue of the Pall Mall Gazette. Not racing this time, but gambling. A raid by police found 6 men and 4 women in what they called a gambling den in Mayfair. Not a very auspicious occasion, but I don't think it was anything other than a small group of friends. The house was probably under surveillance anyway, and Dorothy and most of those present were never fined, only those that the police had on their radar. The other small note is found in the referee of April 1914, when it mentions a review at the London Palladium, including the motorist Dorothy Levitt. No other stage references have been found. In 1921, the 1921 census confirms her living at Upper Baker Street. She puts her occupation as author, ex-pioneer racing motor racer, and an aviator. But as I found common with her, she lied about her age and where she was born. It says on there Notting Hill Gate. She was not born in Notting Hill Gate. Dorothy died on the 17th of May 1922. There is a reference to a coroner's report, but the Westminster Archives sent a number of these reports to the London Metropolitan Archives to look after, and these particular ones have gone missing. No newspaper report could be found. Her death certificate states she was found in bed, morphine poisoning, while suffering from heart disease and attack of measles. Misadventure. In her will, she left £224 2 and 5 to her sister Elsie, with a request to be buried in a field by the sea. She is therefore buried on top of a hill at the Meadowview Jewish Cemetery, Brighton. Standing by her grave, you can see the English Channel just behind the stone. So if you look through the trees, you can actually see the sea. So she got a wish. This was taken on the 100th anniversary this year, marked by a family visit and recorded for the Brighton local TV station. The gentleman on the left-hand side is the writer of the book that I helped produce. Her legacy. For at least 70 years after her death, the name Dorothy Levitt had faded from the public view. Only the motoring fraternity like Bewley, Southport and Brooklands continuously kept the memory of this amazing person going. There were a few motoring history books naming her pre-2000, but it was not until 2009 did she at last become recognised. BBC with Penelope Keith presenting aired a programme about her Liverpool to London record drive, which also championed her various achievements. Then in 2015, there was a BBC radio play by Jerome Vincent about Dorothy and her exploits. She also designed clothing for lady drivers, a sample of which was on a mannequin in Mr. Selfridge. I did ask the program producers or makers, but that jacket was not original; it was made up. But as Mr. Selfridge was passing by, the lady that was the person passed by saying this is a jacket made for Dorothy Levitt. Since then, I've helped write a book for which we had had a terrific launch party. At the Reform Club Pall Mall, then at Hampton Court in August. A concourse event held a race in honour of Dorothy, with myself and Michael Barton presenting the prizes. Earlier in April, the Jewish Museum had a special centenary display about her life, which I helped put together, plus a few interviews. This one was in the Jewish Chronicle. In 2014, she was on the top of the list for a blue plaque, but unfortunately, they ran out of money. So we now have to wait 10 years to resubmit. It should be confirmed in 2024. It so happens about 2 hours ago today, I had an email saying that in Sydney, Australia, they're putting on a play to do with her life. So it'd be interesting to see what they do, although it appears to be a musical, but we'll see. And then we come to today. So I hope you remember her name. And if you are ever in Brighton, please visit the Meadowview Cemetery and leave a stone to this wonderful lady. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating. She sounds a delightful person. Are there any questions, please, for Tony? I have a couple of things I'd like to ask. Was there any romance? Did you find any romance during your studies?
Well, various newspaper reports said that the reason she got on so well with Selwyn Edge is because she was romantically involved with him.
Oh.
I haven't actually put in any things that I can't find proof of. For instance, when she went to Madeira, she was actually there for 9 months. And a lot of reports have said that she went there because she was expecting and she didn't want to have any problems over here. So she went over there on holiday and had the child there. But I don't know. There is something going, again, some of the modern day writers say that the word Madeira doesn't actually mean the country, it means something else, but you know,
right.
There's no proof.
Okay, before I come to Michael Crook, I know he's waiting to ask, can I just ask one more thing? There was a series some years ago, The Duchess of Duke Street, which was about a hotel. Was it the hotel to do with your family?
No, I don't think so. No. If you're talking about the Howard's Hotel, her grandfather ran. It didn't last very long. I think it lasted about 10, 12 years at the most.
Okay, thank you. Michael Crook, Michael, you've got a question for Tony?
Yeah, hi Tony.
Hi.
Thanks very much. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for plugging Brighton. We always like to get publicity, especially if it's good publicity. Although she was working for a car builder and engineer, all this must have cost a lot of money. But did she have any sources of income other than what she was being paid, or did her employer pick up all the bills for all this motoring around the country?
It appears Selwyn Edge, her employer, did finance the vast majority of it. So two things. One, she did get money for some of her newspaper reports, for some of it was written by her. So she did get paid that. But it just shows when Selwyn Edge took away his sponsorship of her, she didn't have much left. So there was no other money other than money that she got from her family occasionally. So it wasn't as if she was paid much during her racing career. We do think that Selwyn Edge actually took everything. He did pay for the cars and getting it repaired, but that's about it. I don't think she was paid for anything else.
Thank you, Tony. Is anything else, Michael?
It just so happens that I was at Brooklands last weekend with son and grandson. Is there actually anything about her there? Because I don't recall seeing anything, but then there's an awful lot of material on display there.
There are things in the archives there. They're not. I don't think they're on display. There are. I mean, if you go to, I'm not sure about Brighton, but certainly Hastings has got in their museum. They've got things about Bexhill-on-Sea. Have also got a display where there's sort of artifacts or photographs of her there. But I don't think Brooklands have got anything yet.
No, if anybody's interested, there is an article about her on the Brighton Museum site, which I've just found.
Yes.
I don't think it tells us anything that you haven't already said, but it's about her presence in the speed trials on Brighton Front.
Right. Well, the article that in the Jewish Chronicle that double spread was written by Yael
Brewer.
Well, yeah,
she's our local JC correspondent.
Right. Well, we met her when we went down to Brighton to visit the cemetery. We met her there, and she was the one that did the filming for the TV.
Yep, know her well. Thanks very much.
No.
Raymond, you have got a question, please?
Yes, Tony. Enjoyed the talk very much, being a bit of a car freak over the years. Slightly connected to motor, well, it is connected to motoring. Are you aware, well, most people are, of the mascot on the Rolls Royce? The Silver Lady, as it was commonly called, or it is commonly called, but its actually proper name is the Spirit of Ecstasy. The model for that mascot was a lady named Violette Rafoul, Raphoul. And I picked up on that name thinking that could be Raphael. Do you know anything about this?
No, I don't. But the person that I helped write the book, Michael Barton, sorry, is extremely knowledgeable about motor racing. That's his forte. So I shall mention it to him and see what he says. But I mean, on the book, he did all the motoring details, and I did the genealogy part of it. So, so I will check that with him. You never know.
You never know. I was curious, more curious, because one of my relatives in the Isaacs family was Bonato. The Bonatos, we know they were Isaacs, don't we, for most of us anyway. And he was a Brooklands boy. He was one of the Bentley boys, quite famous at Brooklands many years ago. And it went across my mind, well, they raced Bentleys. I wonder if they raced Rolls Royces, but they didn't. I just wondered if you knew anything about that.
No. I actually haven't been to Brooklands yet. I've been to the other places, but not to Brooklands yet. Because there was nothing I knew that they had other than on a few things on the archives. There was no point in going there. The two images that we managed to find were not actually from the Brooklands archives. I think they were from another photo gallery.
Right, thank you. Very good.
Thank you, Raymond. Anita, you have a question?
Yes, I was interested in your heart line. Her grandfather who was a heart.
Yeah, the heart. I'm just trying to remember the name.
Joseph Hart. Was it a Joseph Hart?
Marriage to Leah Hart.
No, it's a Moss Hart, I think it was.
And who were the people that have the hotel that supplied the kosher wine to the Great Synagogue?
That was Joseph Raphael and Philip Raphael.
Oh, right, okay. I mean, the only reason they would have supplied wine to a synagogue would have been for a kiddush. Yeah. Otherwise, I can't think of any other reasons why they would want to supply wine. And the other thing that I found of interest, very good talk, by the way, was that on one of the censuses, you found a child that had, for the same family, that had the same name of a sibling that had previously died, Is that right? Was that a John?
Yes.
Which is very unusual in Ashkenazi families.
Well, it was, wait a minute, I'm not sure if you're referring to the 1911 census, but that's the only one where they had to put down how many children they had and how many children survived, and that's where we found that Dorothy's mother had, I think there was 5 children, 4 or 5 children, and only Dorothy and Elsie survived. That's the only thing that I've gotten. And I mean, there was no other census that named a dead child.
Right, I thought you said there was somebody called John, that you found 2
No,
Johns.
right, okay, okay, no, right. Jacob, Dorothy's father, Jacob, changed his name to John Levitt, and yet Jacob had a brother called John, who was still alive in 1901. So why he changed his name to John, we don't know.
Right, okay, right.
There's no reason for that.
Okay, right,
Now,
I understand.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand if his brother John had died in 1899 or something or other, and then in 1901 he decided he wanted to commemorate him by taking his name, maybe, but why he did it while his brother was still alive, I don't know.
Yeah, very confusing.
Well, it's more confusing when you're looking up a census.
Yeah.
The name Jacob Jacob Levy, and then finding that he's changed both his names, his first name and his surname. I mean, it was only because I kept on digging and digging, knowing that they were around somewhere, and then clicked on his sister and looked up her census, and there they were.
Yeah.
The Hart connection, Tony, you mentioned, was Philip Raphael married Leah Hart from Portsmouth, the original family, I think.
Yes, yeah.
And the other thing that just occurs to me, leading on from what Anita is saying, the spelling of their name, Levi, is usually a Sephardi spelling, actually.
Yes, it is. They're descended from Lemon Levy, who I'm sure.
I don't think they're not Sephardim. I don't think Lemon. I mean, there's a Lemon Hart.
Yeah, that's a different family.
Different family.
Yeah, yeah.
I just wondered if there was a Sephardi connection because of the spelling of the name, Levi, as opposed to Y.
I haven't got it on screen, but the genealogy, I have dealt further into the Levy family. It does go back. I have found a few generations going back. Right,
and Jeanette has just made a comment that it could be a German-Jewish connection, the spelling of the name, Ashkenazi rather than Sephardi, she thinks.
Yeah.
Okay, Bernard, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. The question is about documentation and research. Driving licenses were introduced in 1903. Although all you had to do was basically go to a post office and give your name. And I think they cost 6pence initially. But I wondered whether or not you had come across any of her driving licenses or driving license records. And she wouldn't have had to take a test when they were introduced in 1935, because people who were driving before then didn't have to. But I was just wondering about that as a source of documentation. And the other thing is that I've found a connection through some of my Sephardic family to hers, but it does look as if they were Ashkenazi. But I was intrigued with the Culverston Crescent connection, because my old friend Hetty Bauer, whom I've talked about before, who died at the age of 108, was born at 22 Culverston Crescent in 1905. And I remember taking her to look at the house and kind of interviewing the people who were living there. in about 2011, 2012. So it's an interesting set of connections. But the question was about using licenses as documentation, and also cars had to be registered from the turn of the century. So I wondered whether registration records showed any ownership by her.
No, we've trying to look at the registration on the cars, because some of the cars that she was using, you could see the number quite clearly, but we can't find any documentation on that. And I'm almost certain that they were all owned by Napier Cars.
Right.
And he was a big manufacturer. I mean, to have had showroom in the New Burlington Street. You know, he was quite well known at that time. And Napier Cars, there's still quite a few around, and there's still, you know, certainly Brooklands, I think, has got some, and Bewley has got quite a few. So they were good cars.
And the personal driving license?
No, we've not found anything at all. I mean, I've made a note and I will try checking on that, but we've not found anything on that side.
It would just be interesting, because I'm guessing that initially they were issued numerically, and hers would have been one of the earliest.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, 1903 was,
Yeah.
as I said, there was very, very few cars on the road at that time. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for a fascinating talk about an absolutely remarkable woman.
Yeah. Jackie, you have a question for Tony? Jackie Hobson? Yes.
You're muted.
Right. Thank you very much, Doreen. That was a fabulous talk, really interesting. She was clearly a very tough and unconventional woman. And I wondered if, I mean, I love the story of the dog and how she dealt with the men really being perhaps rather unkind in teasing her that way. Does she write anything in her personal diaries that you're aware of about what it was like being the only woman involved in this activity?
No, I mean, what we would love to have found is her actual diary.
Right.
The only thing we've got is when she wrote the book, she put in about 2 pages from dates from her diary, but they really only related to some of the races that she'd done.
I see.
They don't. The only personal comments they made is what the writer of the forward, the gentleman that did the forward to the book, to her book, he got the personal information out of her. And as I say, that personal information was wrong anyway.
Mm.
So she just wanted to, you know, I don't know. I mean, why she did, she didn't want to, I don't know what it was, whether at that time she didn't want to say where she was from or where her parents were from or what, I don't know, but she wasn't very truthful.
Well, an admirable lady, though.
Yes, yes. I mean, I can't believe, you know, as I said, she was driving motor cars in 1903. She then changed to driving motorboats and wasn't just driving them for relaxation. She went to the cows and she did a proper race there.
Mm.
And she could have only have been driving motorboats for, I don't know, 5, 6 months at the most. So then to go there and attempt to into a race and then win and be presented to the king and queen, you know, I'm sure that was because she was probably the only woman racer. So, you know, they thought they'd have a word or bring her out, you know. But yeah, she was a remarkable lady, and it's unfortunate that she was forgotten about for so many years. But now it's all changed.
Yeah, thanks to you. Thanks to you. Joanna, you have a question? Joanna?
Trying to unmute. Oh, yeah, right. just purely out of interest, my stepfather's first wife was Sheila Derbyshire, who was racing Bugattis and doing hill climbs and everything else. So this was quite interesting, listening to what you had to say about Dorothy being a pioneer of all of this sort of thing. Women doing all of this work, sort of activity. So, you know, as I say,
in the early days, it seems that men and women, you know, there wasn't any differentiation between the two, and I think it was mainly because there wasn't many women anyway. So the racing people that put up on the racing would have taken whoever was driving. If you see what I mean, it wasn't. They didn't separate them because there wasn't enough to separate. So there was very, very few. I think in some races there may have been 3 or 4 lady drivers out of 70 or 80, you know, male drivers. So it didn't make any difference. It was only later on did they separate the two.
Yeah.
Jeanette, you have a comment or question to make?
It's a bit of both. I at one point did a whole load of research into plans for an alternative motor racing circuit that weren't built, and that's why they moved and built Brooklands. And I came across the online archives for Grace's guide, which I would imagine you will have used. And I'm just thinking, the book that you've written, does it have sort of comprehensive sources in, so other people who might be researching people in the sector can follow up using similar sources and resources, Tony?
Some of it does, but I didn't get involved in that side of it. Michael Barton, as I say, was the writer. He was the one that wanted that set it all in motion. And he's a publisher. He's actually a book publisher. So and he specialises in motoring books. So he's well known in that world. But he documented everything. I mean, I got a Dropbox from him. Every time he came across something, he put it in the Dropbox, and it was all labeled and clear where he got it from, you know, what he did. He also managed to, believe it or not, some of the photographs that he got were original photographs, which is why some of them are so clean and clear. He contacted the book that she wrote in 1909. He found who the photographer was, and then found that the photographer's grandson has got all the archives, and contacted him and got the original prints from him. I mean, he had to pay for them, obviously, but he got all the original prints from him. And that's why the book, actually, the photographs are fantastic. You know, he's really done a good job on that. And he put a note of where it came from in there. But he hasn't got, I can't remember seeing in the back of the book whether he's got details of anything to that extent.
Okay, it was a fascinating presentation, and I was just thinking about the applicability of things, and you know, how others could kind of follow the research, and in terms of where they could go to look for their people.
Yeah, well, as I said, we noted everything down. It's taken us at least 2 years,
I'm sure,
to do it, and I was already working on her genealogy well before that, but the book itself has taken 2 years to do.
Thanks.
Thank you, Joanna. Joanna, do you have another question?
Yes. The blue plaque for her. Have English Heritage have taken over the blue plaques? Have they, other than them running out of money, have they given you any other explanation for the delay?
No. What happened was, as I say, in 2014, I contacted them, and they were really enthusiastic. They said, yes, 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 definitely. I sent them all the correspondence that I'd found, all the photographs, all the newspaper reports, everything. And they said, she's on the short list. They then came back and said, we've got 3 that we're looking further into. She would have been on the top if there was a book produced. That's what they told me. But they said she's still, she still may get a plaque. And then they emailed me and said, well, sorry, but we managed to find the money for the first 2 and not the 3rd. So she was put out. I've been in contact with them, must have been 2 years ago. And they said, in 2024, come back to us and we're sure that we can put a plaque up. Whether it's in Colveston Crescent or whether it's in Portman Mansions, they're not sure, but it'll be in one of those 2.
Yeah, it's just that I was involved in a blue plaque, so you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It took something like 15 years from when I submitted it to the GLC
Right.
to when it was actually put up.
Well, they've virtually promised me that it'll be up in 2024, and especially now there's a book published. I can't see them turning that down. We've even offered to pay for it ourselves, but or
yeah,
find a way of getting the money to them. But they said no, it can't be till 2024. That's their rules. Has to be 10 years. After.
Yes, X number of years after their birth and X number of years after their death.
Yeah, next number of years after it was refused first time or not put up first time. You can't do it from 1 year to the other for the same person.
Oh, right.
Bernard, do you have another question or comment?
It's just a quick thing. I'm just looking here and it looks as though there might be a Sephardic connection, because I've found, going back 4 or 5 generations, connection to a family called Benemakor and Serlui, and they're buried in the Sephardic synagogue in Amsterdam. Sorry, in the Sephardic cemetery in Amsterdam. I'm trying to work out what the exact relationship is, but so the possible connection because of the spelling of the surname may be a reality. I'll see what I can find out.
Well, I have sorry I have during the middle of the 19th century there were many mixed marriages, as it were, because I've got a couple
They're right through history. I mean, you know.
I mean, some of my relatives were from Mogadishu.
Right. I've got a connection
and
here.
They were married into the Raphael family.
Right.
And the Posner.
Okay, well, this is the Penemakors and Serluis, who are married into the Lyons, Lippmann, Raphael Levy families. So it would be interesting to follow those. I can't see records of where they're registered between that. But anyway, I will see what I can find. If I find anything interesting, I'll let you know. Thanks.
Thank you.
Susie, you have a question, please?
I was just going to say one more thing about the plaques, if you don't have any joy. Have you come across green plaques? The first time I came across them was in Islington, where they were the local people who didn't have to be dead for 50 years or whatever the thing is. And we've got them now into the village I live in now. We put the people who've done, it's just funded by our parish council in the village, people of note in the village, but who haven't been dead for long enough to warrant a green plaque, and various houses that have done something interesting, whether it be a workhouse or not or something. I don't know whether you've come across green plaques, and then you could fund it yourself if you said you were willing to do it.
Yeah, no, I've not come across it. I'm sure Hackney Council would, if they were involved, would like to put a plaque up at Culverston Crescent. But I haven't tried them. I really wanted one to go up in Portman Mansions. That was the place I would have preferred it to go up, if possible. The other place where she lived, Upper Baker Street, unfortunately, Upper Baker Street doesn't exist. The road is still there. It's where Sherlock Holmes Museum is. That used to be called Upper Baker Street. And her house, or the house she was in, would have been very close to where the Sherlock Holmes Museum is. In fact, to be honest, that's where I got the photograph from. I contacted the museum because I'd seen that they'd got a photograph of the original building. And I said, would you have one of the houses a few doors down? And they said, they gave me the number who to contact, and they found it for me.
Thank you. Any more questions? I'd just like to ask one thing. Did Dorothy leave a will at all? And if she did, what was it? Who were her main beneficiaries? Oh, I see there's another. We'll come back, Doris, we'll come back to you in a second. Sorry, did you hear that, Tony?
Yes, sorry, yes. I thought it was on the presentation, but she did leave, she left a will and a codicil. And the will was she only left something to her sister, that was all. But it was a very, very short will. There wasn't that much in it. Her father, her grandfather on the Levy side was a jeweler. So Bernard was a jeweler, and she had some rings and whatever which she left to Elsie. But that was about all. She didn't have that. So that's what I'm saying. I think all the racing she did, she had no trophies, no medals. I think they all went to Selwyn Edge. He took everything. Yeah, she didn't have a say in it, though.
Okay, Doris and Hank have something to ask or say?
Just a very quickie. The Transport Trust do red plaques, and she would be involved in transport. Have you contacted them in any way?
I haven't, but I will make a note because, yeah, I will try that. I never thought, and I don't think I've ever seen one.
Well, they're around all over the place.
No.
Definitely the Transport Trust.
All right, I will contact them and see what we can do with them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Michael, you have
a brilliant talk.
Agreed. Michael?
Yeah, whilst we're on the subject of plaques, Tony, did you say she was the first woman to drive in the Brighton Speed Trials?
I'm almost certain she did, because again, I think that was 1904. I'm not sure when the speed trials first started. The writer Michael Barton would know the answer to that, but I'm almost certain she would have been one of the first.
Well, they're just about to start refurbishing the terrace, Madeira Terrace, along there. And Brighton have a blue plaque scheme. And I happen to know the chairman of the commission because we had a blue plaque put up, as some people will know, in 2016 for the 250th anniversary of the community down here. If she was the first woman to drive in the speed trials, although the speed trials themselves are very unpopular with our Green Council, the fact that it was a woman who was driving as early as that might just ring the bells with the blue pack people. So if you could get hold of my email from Lee or somebody and give me your contact, we'll see if there's anything we can do through the local Heritage Commission.
Okay, no, I would do that. I'm just trying to have a look to see. I'm sure it was 1903 when when she first did. I mean, there are quite a few photographs of her. Some of the photographs that I showed on the presentation were taken in Brighton on the front. I don't know if you recognised it.
Yeah,
Recognise those. I mean, it hasn't changed that much. But yeah, I'll look that up, and I will email you. Say I've got all the dates of when she raced from the earliest days, so I will do that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tony. Are there any more questions, please, for Tony? Right, okay, so we will now have a short break, say 10 minutes for a cup of tea, and then we'll hope